The sheriff captured a Comanche warrior until his sister offered to marry. The jailhouse smelled of iron, sweat, and dust. The kind that clung to a man's throat and made even the law feel like sin. Sheriff Thomas Graves stood by the cell door, watching the Comanche warrior sit cross-legged on the floor, wrists bound in iron cuffs that caught the sunlight, bleeding through the window. The young man's face was calm, too calm for someone awaiting the noose. "You understand me, son?" Graves asked, his voice low but steady. The warrior didn't answer, only looked up with eyes dark and unflinching, like a storm about to break. The deputy shifted behind the sheriff. "Ain't no point talking, Tom. He don't speak English, and he sure as hell don't care to." Graves turned slightly. "Every man cares when it's his last day," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Outside, the heat shimmered off the dirt road, where townsfolk had already started whispering about the Comanche killer. The rancher's widow had sworn she saw the attack, though Graves knew how truth could twist when blood got involved. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his graying hair, and looked back at the prisoner. The boy, he was hardly more than that, had a mark on his shoulder, a scar that looked old, healed rough. He'd fought before, maybe for food, maybe for family. "What's his name again?" Graves asked. "Toka," said Hale. "Found a tag on his saddlebag." Graves nodded. "Toka," he said quietly, trying the name on his tongue. The warrior's eyes flickered, and for the first time, something like understanding passed between them. Then came the sound of hooves outside, fast and hard, cutting through the stillness like thunder. The deputy went to the door, squinting into the light. "Rider coming in from the south ridge," he said. "Looks like trouble." Moments later, a woman dismounted in front of the jail. Tall and fierce, her dark hair braided with red thread, her dress plain but proud. She didn't look afraid. She looked like someone who'd already lost too much to fear. When Graves opened the door, she met his eyes without flinching. "I am Ayanna," she said, her voice steady despite the long ride. "The man you hold is my brother. I have not come to beg." Graves studied her for a long second. "Then what have you come for?" She lifted her chin. "To end your war," she said. "Before it ends us all." The town's main street fell silent when Ayanna walked through it, her steps measured, her braid heavy with dust from the long ride. Sheriff Graves followed a few paces behind, aware of every eye watching from behind shutters and saloon doors. The blacksmith paused mid-swing, the preacher stopped sweeping his porch, and the widow of the dead rancher stood in the shade, her face twisted in grief and hatred. "You got no business bringing her through here, Tom," Deputy Hale muttered under his breath. "They'll call it betrayal." Graves kept walking. "Let 'em call it what they want. I'm not hanging a man before I know why." Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with whispers. Ayanna stood before the gathered crowd, chin lifted, her gaze level with the men who would judge her people without a word of proof. "You claim your brother killed a white man," Graves said, his voice carrying across the room. "Why ride into a town that wants his blood?" "Because peace is not made by running," she said. "He fought only to live. He did not start this." The widow rose suddenly. "Liar. My husband's blood is on your kin's hands." The room stirred, anger swelling like fire. Ayanna turned toward her, eyes bright but steady. "Then take me instead," she said. The room froze. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. "What did you say?" Graves asked quietly. "I offer myself," she said. "My brother's life for mine. If you must have justice, take it in another way." The preacher frowned. "That's not law." Ayanna looked at him. "Law does not bring back the dead. Only mercy can stop the dying. Graves stared at her, torn between duty and something deeper that stirred behind his ribs. "You'd give your life for his?" he asked. "I already have," she answered. "I only ask you to make it mean something." Hale scoffed. "You expect a sheriff to marry an Indian for peace? You've lost your mind." Graves turned sharply. "You forget yourself, Hale." The deputy clenched his jaw but said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains like a warning. Ayanna met Graves's eyes again. "Your law kills without hearing. My heart speaks before it does. Which one will you trust?" The sheriff said nothing, but his silence was not denial. It was the sound of a man who had just heard truth from a voice the world refused to listen to. By dawn, word of the Comanche woman's offer had spread across every porch and saloon like wildfire, burning through gossip and fear alike. The sheriff's office was crowded by sunrise, town elders, the widow, and men who called themselves peacekeepers but carried rifles on their backs. Graves stood behind his desk, hands resting on the worn wood, while Ayanna faced them all without a tremor. "This is madness," barked Judge Marin, his gray beard trembling. "You can't trade a life for a marriage. The law doesn't bend for sentiment." Ayanna's voice was calm, but iron strong. "The law bends for power every day. Today, let it bend for mercy." A murmur rolled through the room. Graves kept his gaze on her, torn between respect and the impossible decision tightening around his chest. "If I accept this bargain," he said, "your brother walks free. But you stay here, under my name, under my protection." "Under no man," she corrected quietly. "I stay under peace, but I will keep your name if it keeps him alive." Hale slammed his hand against the wall. "Tom, you can't be serious. You marry her and this town will eat you alive." Graves shot him a hard look. Maybe it's time this town learned how to choke on its own hate. Ayanna's eyes softened for just a moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "If you do this, you'll answer to the governor himself. Then he can ride down here and hang me for it," Graves said. "But I won't hang a boy who never swung a blade in anger." The widow's voice cracked like glass. "And my husband's death?" Graves met her gaze. "I'll find who took him, no matter whose side the killer rode on. But not this boy." She turned away, weeping quietly into her shawl. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering dust across the porch like restless spirits. Graves reached into the desk drawer, pulling out the old Bible he used for weddings and oaths. He looked at Ayanna. "You sure this is what you want?" She nodded once. "I do not fear your God or your law," she said softly. "I fear a world where no one dares to love past their own kind." Graves swallowed, then opened the book to the only verse he remembered. "Then let it be done," he said. "Not for law, for peace." The rain came suddenly that evening, spilling down from a black sky as if heaven itself couldn't bear to watch what was about to happen. The small chapel on the edge of town glowed with lamplight, its wooden walls creaking under the weight of thunder. Inside, Sheriff Graves stood stiff in his cleanest shirt, the color of bone, his badge dull from years of wear. Across from him stood Ayanna, her hair still damp from the storm, her eyes steady but unreadable. Between them, the preacher trembled slightly, as though caught between two worlds. "Before God and men," he said, voice unsteady, "you stand to bind what was never meant to be bound." Graves met Ayanna's gaze. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I already did," she whispered back. The preacher cleared his throat. Do you, Thomas Graves? Take this woman. I do, Graves said, not waiting for the rest. And do you, Ayanna of the Comanche people, take this man. I take peace where it is offered, she said softly. The words hung there, fragile but unbreakable. The preacher hesitated, then closed the Bible. By the authority vested in me, may the Lord forgive what man cannot understand. Ayanna's brother, Toka, stood at the back of the room, unshackled but silent, watching as tears traced clean lines through the dust on his face. Hale was nowhere to be seen. He'd refused to come. When the ceremony ended, the crowd outside didn't cheer or clap. They just stared through the rain, whispering the word traitor as if it were a hymn. Graves placed his hat on Ayanna's head and led her outside. You'll stay in the sheriff's quarters tonight, he said quietly. Safer that way. She looked up at him, rain dripping from her lashes. You think safety comes from walls? No, he admitted. It comes from choices. They walked through the storm toward the small house behind the jail, the sound of thunder rolling like distant drums. Inside, he lit the lantern, the glow soft against her face. For a moment, the world seemed smaller, just two souls bound by circumstance, trying to breathe the same air without breaking. Your people will hate me for this, she said. They'll call me weak. He looked at her, tired eyes full of something gentler than pity. Then we'll both be hated, he said. And maybe that's how peace starts. Outside, lightning split the horizon, but inside, the fire didn't go out. Days passed like years in the little house behind the jail, each sunrise bringing new stares and fresh whispers. Ayanna swept the floor each morning while Graves wrote his reports at the desk, neither of them speaking much, both pretending not to notice how the silence grew softer, not colder. The townsfolk avoided the sheriff now, and when they didn't, they made sure he heard what they thought. She'll slit your throat in your sleep, one man hissed outside the saloon. Graves ignored him, but his hand had stayed near his gun all the same. Inside, Ayanna learned the rhythm of the place, the way the stove creaked before dawn, the way he whistled low when he was thinking. One evening she cooked bread from cornmeal she'd brought in her saddlebags, the smell filling the small room. Graves looked up from his paperwork. Smells better than anything we got in town, he said. It's what my mother made before war took her voice, she answered. He nodded quietly. I reckon mine would have liked her. For a moment, neither spoke, and the only sound was the soft patter of rain against the window. That night, a shout came from outside. The clatter of boots, the ring of metal. Graves stepped out, hand on his revolver. A small group of men stood by the porch, led by Deputy Hale, their faces hard in the lantern light. Town council says the Comanche boy's got to go, Hale said. They want him gone by dawn. He's under my protection, Graves said evenly. Hale sneered. And she? What's she under, Tom? Your roof or your spell? The men laughed. Graves didn't. You step 1 foot closer, and I'll remind you who carries the badge, he said, voice low but sharp. Hale spat in the dirt. You ain't sheriff of this town anymore. You're just a man with a woman they all fear. They left after a few tense seconds, but the message stayed behind like smoke. When he returned inside, Ayanna was standing near the window, her hand on the rifle she'd learned to use before her 12th winter. You can't fight a town for me, she said. I'm not, Graves replied. I'm fighting for what's right. She looked at him a long time, then set the rifle down. Then you fight for both of us now, The lantern light flickered, and for the first time, they didn't look away. The next morning brought no peace, only the sound of hooves and the rising heat that made the horizon tremble. Graves knew before he stepped onto the porch that something was wrong. The silence of the street was too thick, too careful. When he reached the jailhouse, the door was already open. Inside, Toka's cell was empty. The lock had been forced. His gun was gone. Hale sat behind the desk, leaning back like a man who'd already written his own defense. "You let them take him," Graves said, his voice low and dangerous. "Didn't have to let them," Hale said. "Town did what Town's been wanting to do since you brought him here. They're taking him to Red Hollow for trial. You can catch up if you think you can outrun justice." Graves slammed him against the wall, fury in every breath. "You call this justice?" "I call it survival," Hale hissed. "He's a murderer, and she's the curse that blinded you." Graves let him go, disgusted, and turned for the door. Ayanna was already there, saddlebag in hand, her eyes burning with something between terror and defiance. "He's gone," she said. "They'll hang him before sundown. Not if I reach them first." "You can't go alone." "And you can't stop me," he said, swinging into the saddle. But before he could ride out, her hand caught his arm. "Thomas," she said quietly, and it was the first time she'd used his name. "If you die, peace dies too." He looked down at her, rain beginning to fall in slow, heavy drops. "If I don't, then peace was never real." She mounted her horse and followed before he could stop her. The road to Red Hollow wound through canyons that echoed with thunder. By the time they reached the ridge, they saw the crowd below, a rough gallows rising against the storm. The boy stood beneath it, hands bound again, face to the wind. Graves rode down fast, shouting for them to stop, but gunfire cracked the air before his voice reached the platform. The bullet missed, splintering the post near Toka's head. Ayanna screamed his name. Hale's voice cut through the rain. "Too late, Sheriff. You broke the law, and now the law breaks you." Graves drew his gun, not at Hale, but at the rope. And the single shot that followed tore through more than hemp. It split the silence of every man watching, and nothing would ever sound the same again. Smoke curled above Red Hollow as the storm gave way to wind, carrying the scent of gunpowder and shame. The rope hung severed, swaying like a ghost above the empty gallows. Graves stood in the mud, gun still warm, while Toka knelt behind him, breathing hard but alive. Around them, men hesitated between vengeance and fear. Hale's face was pale beneath his hat. "You've done it now, Tom," he said, his voice shaking. "You've just declared war on every man in this town." Graves holstered his weapon slowly. "Then maybe it's time these men remembered who started it." Ayanna rushed to her brother, cutting the ropes with her knife, whispering words Graves couldn't understand but could feel. The boy's hands were trembling, not from pain, but disbelief. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "You should have let me go." "I don't let blood fade into dust," she answered. Hale motioned toward the others. "Arrest them! Hang 'em both!" No one moved. The thunder had left its mark, and the men who'd come to kill looked at Graves and saw something different now, something dangerous and awake. Graves turned to them, rain dripping from his coat. "This ends now," he said. "You'll not hang another soul to make yourselves feel righteous." He turned to Ayanna. "Get him on a horse. We ride south." Hale barked, "You run! They'll come for you." Graves met his stare. "Then they'll find out how far peace will fight back." They rode into the dark plains, the three of them, shadows against the last light of day. By the time the rain stopped, they'd reached the river bend, where cottonwoods grew thick and the stars broke through the clouds. Toka slept near the fire, too weak to speak, while Ayanna watched the flames dance across her brother's face. "You can't go back," she said softly. "They'll call you outlaw now." "Maybe that's what I've been all along," Graves replied. "A lawman who forgot that justice and mercy aren't the same thing." She looked at him, eyes reflecting the fire. "You risked everything for a man, not your own. Why?" He stared into the flames. "Because I couldn't stand another grave with a name we didn't bother to learn." Ayanna smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's still hope for your kind." The fire popped, sending sparks into the dark. Graves looked up at her and said quietly, "Maybe hope is my kind." By dawn, the plains were streaked in gold, and their horses stood restless near the riverbank. Graves knew the peace would not last. Men like Hale didn't sleep when they'd been shamed. He saddled his horse in silence while Ayanna tended to Toka's wound, wrapping it with cloth torn from her own dress. "He needs rest," she said. "Then he'll get it after we're done," Graves answered. She looked up sharply. "Done with what?" "Ending it, for good." She shook her head. "You can't face them alone." "I'm not. I've got the truth on my side." "Truth won't stop a bullet," she said. He smiled faintly. "No, but it makes dying easier." Before he could say more, the sound of hooves rolled over the horizon. 15 riders, rifles catching the morning light. Hale rode at the front, his face carved from pride and fury. "You think you can steal a murderer from justice and ride off like a hero?" he called. Graves moved forward, steady and calm. "That boy isn't a murderer. He's the proof you're all too scared to face. The proof that peace can live between us if we let it." Hale spat into the dust. "Peace don't feed widows or bury sons." "Neither does hate," Graves said. The wind rose, carrying the scent of wet grass and gun oil. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Hale lifted his rifle, and the crack of thunder that followed split the morning in two. Graves' horse reared. The bullet grazed his arm. He dropped to one knee, firing back. Men scattered, shouting. Ayanna dragged Toka behind the rocks, firing once with deadly precision. The shot knocked Hale's hat clean off his head, grazing his cheek. The others froze. "Drop your guns," Graves shouted, blood running down his sleeve. "This isn't a war anymore. It's a choice." One by one, rifles lowered. Even Hale hesitated, eyes darting between the siblings and the man bleeding before them. Finally, he lowered his weapon. "You'll hang for this," he muttered. "Then hang me clean," Graves said, "because I'd rather die for mercy than live for hate." The wind died, leaving only the sound of the river. Hale turned his horse, shame heavy on his shoulders. "Get out of Red Creek," he said. "Don't come back." Graves looked at Ayanna and Toka. "Wasn't planning to." They rode south again, the land wide open, the fire behind them spent but not forgotten. The sun climbed slow over the canyon rim, painting the red rock with warmth that felt almost like forgiveness. They had ridden far through the night until the land turned quiet and the sky was wide enough to breathe again. Graves sat by the river, washing the blood from his arm, while Ayanna stood near Toka, pressing a hand to his forehead. "He'll live," she said softly. "He's strong." "Stronger than I was at his age," Graves murmured. "Stronger than most men I've met." Ayanna knelt beside her brother, smoothing his hair like she had when he was small. "He will not forget what you did." Graves shook his head. "He shouldn't. But he shouldn't carry it either." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes deep with something unspoken. You've lost your home for us. Home's just boards and walls, he said. I still got my word. She smiled faintly. Among my people, a word like that binds souls. Then maybe I was meant to speak it, he replied. Toka stirred, his voice weak. They'll come again, won't they? Graves looked toward the horizon. Not for a while. Fear takes time to grow back after it burns. Ayanna rose and walked to the edge of the clearing. The wind played with her hair, lifting the strands like feathers. When I swore to marry for peace, I didn't understand what it meant, she said. Now I do. It means giving your heart where your fear lives. Graves stood, slowly walking toward her. Then we both did that. She met his eyes. If I ask you to stay, will you? If I do, I'll bring trouble with me. Maybe trouble is just the world testing love, she said. His laugh was quiet, almost sad. You sound like a preacher. No, she said, looking at him with warmth that broke through the morning chill. I sound like a woman who's already chosen. They stood in silence as the light turned their faces gold. In that moment, the river's voice was softer, as if the land itself had accepted their vow. Behind them, Toka smiled weakly, whispering words in his own tongue, a prayer that the spirits might bless the strangers who fought for peace. Graves looked back at him, then at her. I reckon that makes it official, he said. She stepped closer, touching his wounded arm. No, she whispered. It makes it sacred. Weeks later, the world had quieted enough for the scars to turn pale and the story to become some legend. The land near Red Creek was empty now, save for the wind and the slow whisper of the river where it bent around the cottonwoods. Graves had built a small cabin there, its smoke curling steady into the morning air. Inside, Ayanna moved with quiet grace, grinding corn beside the hearth while Toka sat by the window, carving a small wooden hawk. It will fly when it's ready, he said, smiling shyly at his own work. Graves nodded from the porch. That's how most things worth keeping begin. He stepped outside, watching the river flash silver under the sun. Across the water stood 2 riders, Lakota envoys sent to carry a message from the chief. They raised a hand in greeting, then rode away without crossing. Graves watched them go. They've accepted the peace, he said softly. Ayanna joined him on the porch, resting her hand on his arm. You gave them more than peace, she said. You gave them proof that mercy can live in men. He turned to her, the corners of his eyes softened by the light. And you gave me reason to believe it. She smiled, eyes glistening. We've both been healed by the same fire. Toka stepped out with his carving and set it on the railing. For the river, he said, so it won't forget. Graves nodded. Rivers remember everything, even the things we try to bury. The breeze carried the scent of wild sage, and a hawk circled high above them, its wings cutting through the gold sky. Ayanna leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think they'll come again one day? Maybe, he said. But this time, they'll find something worth guarding. She looked toward the horizon. And if the world forgets what we did here? Graves smiled faintly. Then we'll tell it again. The wind shifted, lifting the carved hawk from the porch, spinning it once before it landed softly in the grass. He picked it up and set it on the windowsill, its small wooden wings catching the light. Some things ain't meant to fly away, he said. Ayanna took his hand, her voice quiet but sure. Then let's stay grounded together. He kissed her forehead as the fire crackled inside, and the river sang on, steady, forgiving, and alive. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Crimson West. If mercy cost you your home but bought you peace, would you still pay that price? Tell us in the comments below.